Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Masters of Marketing. We're here every day live to bring you an experienced marketer to share their insights to keep you ahead of the wave. Masters of Marketing isn't Ask Me Anything, so if you have a question at any point in time, if you're watching on Facebook, drop it in the chat. If you're watching on Zoom, drop it there. We're happy to ask our presenter. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with the author of Copywriting for Dummies. He's going to teach us how to use persona insights to craft messages that are ruthlessly relevant to your markets. Let's give a warm welcome to Jonathan Kranz. Jonathan, it's great to have you today.
Thank you. Thank you. I want a big shout out to Ross, Brian, Jody, and everyone else at Alpha Voice. Thank you. And of course, I'm thanking you for showing up. Let me get this thing started and we'll begin.
Let's do it.
So yes, thank you, sir. So our theme today is about using our understanding of how buyers behave, how they shop, to craft the foundation for our communications and our content. A little about me before we go further. As Ross said, I'm a copywriter. I'm the author of Writing Copy for Dummies. I've been copywriting now for 25 years with a concentration in B2B, particularly high-tech, financial services, healthcare, and in B2C, higher education, all high consideration purchasing kind of things. And it seems like I have a great deal of overlap in my experience with the kind of people who are participating today. I assume that most of you are in high tech, most of you from the Valley, almost all of you probably in B2B, perhaps with a mixture of B2C in there. I think this will be relevant for all of you. And I put these logos up on the screen just to give you an indication that, yes, this is work I've been doing with brands that you recognize. I'm sure you work with or are familiar with at least half or more of these. So what I'm drawing on today is in 5 years of experience in using persona research as a foundation for crafting marketing messages for a variety of companies from generally medium to large size. So what's the point of this whole thing? Why even bother going through this activity at all? And it's because of the traditional obligation that if we are to reach our audience, we have to say something to them. And in the old days, that was really about, well, how do we position ourselves for advertising and direct marketing? But of course, as our technologies has evolved and the ways we're communicating have changed, it also means how do we inform our content strategy to be relevant to our audience? What is the essence of our web presence? What are we doing there and for whom? What about balancing how we're represented in traditional media and social media? And though I know this is a rather narrow category, it actually comes up as a large driver, and that is the proliferation of marketing automation platforms. As more companies acquire these platforms and or they realize that these platforms can mean something more than just a means for delivering email, they're obligated to figure out, well, what is it they're going to say to all these people that we're communicating to? So let me talk what's today about our agenda today. So the first part of this, I just briefly want to talk about what personas are and what they're not. And that latter part is even more important. About 99% of what goes that's classified as profiles or personas are not. They're usually rubbish. Process. I want to talk about two things, a little bit of the context of how this research is conducted, and more importantly, how then it becomes used as a foundation for crafting messages. And I'll go through those two processes briefly and as pain-free as possible. But the most important part of this presentation, the one that I'm most eager to get to, is practical realities and lessons learned as a consequence of doing this work and advice I can share with you. And I'm talking practical realities about what do you do when you don't have research? How do you feed that marketing automation machine? What are some common themes that emerge as in this research? And what lessons can we learn from mistakes made? So that's the agenda. Ross said earlier that you can ask questions at any time, and I want to reiterate that. Please put them in the chat box, and Ross will act as our conduit to audibly speak them out to me, and I can respond. Some of you may have questions that are sensitive, that you may not be able to speak openly about because they touch on proprietary issues. Do not fear. After this presentation, please reach out to me. I'll give you my contact information. You can reach out to me by email or LinkedIn, and we can have those conversations offline so that you don't jeopardize the confidentiality of your organization. So let's talk about personas, what they are and what they're not. Starting with what they're not. They're not what you see on the screen. Most profiles are an assemblage of information of little consequence. Things like where they live, what region they're in, their hobbies and interests, something about their psychological motivations, which are just really assumptions and guesses, etc., etc., etc. Stuff that I find rather meaningless because from my perspective, I don't care if you play golf or you like ice cream sundaes. What I'm really interested in, how and why buyers buy. What motivates them? What inhibits them? What do they hope to accomplish as a result of making this purchase? What do they want to avoid? What are the things that prevent them from buying? What are the things that stimulate them into buying? What builds confidence? What erodes confidence? That's at the heart of a truly, genuinely useful persona. And unfortunately, they're all too rare. When I talk about messages that we form as a consequence of going over this research carefully, I want to talk about what they are and what they're not. We're not crafting copy. We're crafting the conceptual underpinnings that can be massaged into customer or buyer-facing messaging or copy. They're not intended to tell the complete story of an organization. The messages we arrive at are intended instead to provoke, to stimulate people into accepting a demo or a dinner with you, to keep the ball moving, to keep them rolling, to get them engaged with you in the first place. For very obvious reasons, they should not be company or brand centric because no one cares. We want to get to the part where people care, and that means that messages are necessarily buyer centric. As a consequence of the research, you'll learn quite a few things regarding sales plays, sales objections, and plays you can do to counter them. But the messages we create aren't intended for individual instances per se. We leave that to the salespeople. Remember that messages are for the larger universe set of the market as a whole. These last two are the most important here. I want to draw the attention here. Whoa, hey, where's my pen? Come here. Yep, pen, thank you. Here, these two things. Traditionally, we've been told as marketers to focus on benefits. That is, anchor in the promises. The problem is that now in 2020, and the kinds of things that we sell, people know what the benefits of digitization are. They know the advantages of these things. Even forward-thinking initiatives, machine learning, AI, IoT, people already know what the benefits of those things are or will be. What's missing is the sense that you or your company can actually deliver on that. So that's why we say that messages must be anchored in proof. And secondly, we're not looking to create the ideal company with an ideal message for an ideal audience. We're always addressing the realities of what's on the ground. And that's why the research component is so important, because it anchors us. Talk a little bit about process. I told you I was going to talk about two processes, a little bit about the research and then about the messaging workshop that happens later to translate that research into messages. I chose this picture of the Gordian knot to suggest that the right kind of research is actually quite simple. I work with a company called the Buyer Persona Institute that's led by someone you may recognize, Adele Ravella. She's a popular speaker at many marketing conferences, particularly in business to business. And the buyer persona approach to research does not involve surveys and does not involve a scripted interview. Instead, researchers are trained to begin approximate 20-minute interview with about 10 people selected who are not customers. They may be, but it's randomized for a very important reason. You don't want to just restrict it to people who bought. You want to know why people didn't buy. So 10 people recruited for 20-minute conversations with research interviewers. One question: take me back to the day you first started shopping for X. What happened? And then it's the researcher's job from there to ask further probing questions. Who was involved? Who did you talk to? What were your considerations? What did you hope to accomplish? What stood in the way? Why not this? Why that? Etc. So that what you get then is a recorded conversation between the research interviewer and the participant. From those conversations are transcribed, and then the researcher compiles the observation so that anything that someone rated that came up more than once, 2, 3, 4 people brought up is considered a buyer expectation, an insight into what people who are shopping for this kind of thing are looking for. And then in the final report, what it looks like is a buyer expectation or insight, and then underneath it, 2 or 3 key quotes that illustrate what that is. That's the research product. As you may know, it's against the law to do a presentation without the overlapping ovals in a Venn diagram, and certainly I'm not a lawbreaker. I'm just going right down the middle, and I'm going to follow the same damn cliche. So what you find is that research is represented by that red circle. What is it that buyers need to hear or understand before they can commit? The second part, that gray circle, is all the stuff that you know about your company and what you can deliver. What we want to get at is the stuff in the middle, that so-called perceived value. Ross yesterday saw this and he goes, "What's that drop about?" And I said, "I have no clue. I borrowed this off of my buyer persona deck. I don't know why it's there. It looks like we're squeezing blood. Really inappropriate image at this time. Just ignore that. Pretend it's not there." The important thing is we're looking at that overlap between what the research has revealed as the motivations and concerns of your buyers and that what you know as experts in your product or service itself. And we want to find that magic zone in the middle. I'll show you, for example. Put your right hand over the right-hand side and ignore that our most relevant capabilities for the moment. On the left-hand side, under buy expectations, that's the fruit of the research. So if 2 or 3 people mention this, this quality, it gets elevated to an expectation. And then in real life, in the report, you would see quotes underneath selected from the transcript. So buyer expectations, infrequent users won't need training, solution grows with changing needs, control over automated response content. When I work with clients in real life, you don't get a one-to-one, this is the expectation, this is the capability. Instead, what really happens is that for each expectation, there are multiple capabilities, typically 3 to 5 bullets of potential of capabilities that address that concern. As we look at these buyer expectations together, when I work with these teams, we're really asking ourselves 3 core questions. Excuse me. The first is, substantively, what do you actually deliver to address this concern? Notice that we're largely in the world now of features and functions, not benefits per se, not promises, but what you can actually physically, materially deliver of value. The second question we ask is, in the competitive context of the market as a whole, what's distinct about your capabilities? What's distinct? What's different? Is it better? Is it the same? Is it simply table stakes? Is it unique and no one else can claim it? Or others have something comparable, but given the chance, you could describe why yours is better. And finally, the most important question is, what is it that buyers themselves value most from the capabilities you surface? What is it they care about the most? So that what we want to get at the end, we recommend 5 key messages. Sometimes it's 1 less, 4, sometimes it's 1 more, it's 6, but 5 seems to be the right manageable amount that makes sense, that represent the best intersection of what people are looking for, your ability to deliver it, back with evidence and proof that you can honestly fulfill over and over again. This is not pie in the sky stuff. Remember I said it's real, not ideal. And as you can see on the right, all this stuff relates back to what I said earlier about context. What is the point of these messages? Yes, for direct response campaigns, content strategy, web development. Content strategy, for example, is, well, what kind of content would be appropriate for your audience? What would actually help them move closer to you? Web development. How should your web, not just the copy on it or the pictures or the blogs, but how should it be oriented so that it reflects your ability to meet your audience's most urgent concerns, media presence. But again, the most exciting thing here, I think, is this. It gives, those 5 messages provide focus to your marketing efforts, because even the wealthiest, most resource-rich organization can't spend all that it wants on marketing, and you have to make hard choice about priorities. What this allows you to do through this process to decide which messages or ideas are worth making investments in and which are not. That alone is enough to bring value here. Where should you invest time and energy?
Can I butt
Now
in
is the
quickly?
fun. Yes, please, Ross, go ahead.
So you said that you should figure out what to focus on, but then you also said that it should reflect your company's ability to deliver. I
Mhm.
worked at a design consultancy where they went so strongly into the content we create should reflect our ability to do great design that they couldn't really be agile because everything had to be perfectly designed before it could get out.
Yeah.
So can you go deeper into that sentence that you said and how far should you actually take that?
Well, my first question is, well, your company is working on the assumption that whatever great design means, that can mean a lot of things. Whatever that means is something that's valued by your audience. Do you know if that's true or not? If you feel confident that that's true, not just because you want it to be true, but that's actually something you know from buyers themselves, that great design is like one of the top 5 things they care about, then I say, yes, it makes sense to make that investment, even if it costs you some delays. However, if it's not that important, does it make sense to spend that much time and energy on this design, especially if it creates delays in production? Does
Gotcha.
that answer your question? Is that fair?
Yeah, it totally answers the question.
Okay,
It's
good.
if it matters, but do the research up front and find out.
Which leads, thank you. I didn't pay you to do this, but that turns into my next slide, which is, again, reality time. So I imagine that many people listening right now are asking themselves, saying to themselves, well, Jonathan, that sounds all well and good if you have this research that you described. That sounds really great. But I don't have that research, and I'm not even confident that I can get that money to do it, to commission it. So what can you do? The first temptation is to talk to salespeople. And I say caution because of this. One, remember, salespeople are experts in your customers. Customers only provide one part of the equation, why they bought. Customers won't tell you why they didn't buy why they didn't buy by definition, because they became customers. The other problem with customers is this. You know, when you buy a new car and you got that honeymoon period where your car is the greatest thing in the world, you've just made an incredible investment. And psychologically, we know that when you spend big bucks, you've made a psychological investment, and damn it, you'll defend it. That's not a good place, a starting place to find objective information about motives and behavior. So if you're talking to someone who's just gung-ho, yes, I absolutely love your stuff, that may be flattering, but it's not helpful. So what I recommend then is what Fraser Crane, Dr. Crane would say, I'm listening. And what kinds of ways can we listen more acutely to buyers in lieu of research? Again, research is the gold standard, but I'm talking about the realities where you may not have the greatest access to it. So the first thing I would say, active listening. When you're on social media, I'm not talking about just the comments that people leave on your blogs or your tweets that you put out from your company. I'm talking about visiting the forums and places where your potential customers and buyers go, and listening in and checking out their comments and looking at which things seem most popular, which topics are of the greatest interest. That's great, valuable information to you when you see what's hot and what's not. So social media is something definitely worth reviewing to get a sense of what are people responding to, what things suggest what their real interests are. Another thing you can do is, can you find people to have an interview with? Again, not customers, but buyers in that category. Now, I know that depending on the context, that can be tricky, but it may not be impossible. You may know people through professional associations, just through collegial, whatever. But if you can have that conversation, be non-judgmental and be open. And again, starting with that one question, hey man, when you were shopping for such and such, what was going on? And listen carefully, not just to the substance of what they're saying, but listen for the emotions. Listen for laughter too, if they're so like dismissive or sarcastic. Get those clues to what's going on in their heads behind that purchasing decision. Finally, as a kind of practical way of getting information, And I know this isn't very helpful right now in 2020 in the midst of the coronavirus, but when we once again gather in conferences, um, don't be so distracted by the need to get leads and make sales to neglect your opportunity to gather important information. I certainly do this when I attend conferences, and it's one of my key objectives. Uh, there's only so much I'm going to learn by going to sessions, but afterwards, the after hours where you have drinking and networking, yeah, I want to talk to people, and I want to have casual conversations where they feel relaxed, I feel relaxed, and I can get some sense. Hey man, have you ever looked for a CRM? How'd that go? Did you look at, and you get to a conversation. Use those conferences as an opportunity to listen deeply to what people have to say about their shopping experience in the category in which your product or service lives. The second big question is the marketing automation platform that I mentioned earlier. And this really was a surprise to me about how often this is the driver for them to get research and get messaging. The research is driven by this idea that, well, if you hire a consultant to help you in the implementation of a marketing automation platform, the first thing they're going to tell you is, oh, you got to segment your groups, right? You're going to segment it because you have different emails or different segments or different content going in different segments. Okay, in theory, not wrong. However, many of us don't have adequate information or data about how to appropriately segment. Please do not make random segments by making guesses and assumptions based on things like titles or region or ages or any of that. The truth is, if you don't know how they buy, you don't really know what the real segments are. And what I encourage you to do is segment based on real behaviors you've measured and observed. One way to do that is relatively inexpensive is to do A/B testing with content. I used this example with Ross yesterday because it's a simple one. I think it works. If I have a tech product, I may find that, well, I know there's some people whose first concern is security. Security is number one, business continuity, etc. But then there's another group whose biggest concern is, will this technology work with the ERP I already have and that I've already invested in? Two related but different things. You may test. There may be an ebook about integration, how to get the best how you can integrate with your CRM to get the maximum value of the information to apply to and draw out of your CRM or something like that, versus 10 top security secrets of inside professionals, etc. The point is you deliberately craft the content as bait for very concentrated areas of interest, and those click-throughs or rejections give you a clue based on their behaviors of what they want and don't want, of where they belong in terms of segments. I just want to say something about titles, because the temptation, the default is, if you don't know, can't you just use the titles? I mean, if I know someone's marketing director, they're a marketing director, operations is operations. The problem with titles is that they're not consistent. That is, it's not always clear that the title gives you real information, what exactly it is that they do. That, in other words, that same title across different companies can really mean different sets of authority and responsibilities. So the titles themselves are a clue, but can't be the entire thing. So I recommend that if you're desperate, don't have the research, and you got to do the segmentation for the marketing automation, test so that your segments are based on real behaviors, not assumptions.
So cutting in here,
please go in. Yeah.
So let's say that you don't even have a list yet. Is titles a good place to start, or would you recommend you get, like if you're selling to marketing, you get everyone in the marketing function at that company and you test this to them? Are you saying titles isn't a good way to segment if you already have a list, but could it be a good place to start if you don't have a list at all?
I would say talk to a professional list broker, first of all. I'm not a professional data guy. No, seriously, I'm not kidding. I'm not joking. I am not joking. I'm not trying to punt. It's true. You got to talk to, this is where it makes sense to talk to a serious experienced list or data professional, because they have the ability to dive deep and say, well, what's underneath levels? Does this really match up to what it is you get? Most of the time when people start, it's rare that they get a marketing automation platform they haven't been marketing before. So what they're usually working from is their old in-house lists that might be compiled from multiple partners, especially if there have been multiple mergers and acquisitions, for example, or there's multiple functions that touch on similar people. And usually it's all this in-house mess that's aggregated, perhaps supported by some third-party stuff that you bought or rented, etc. So to answer your question, it's so dependent on the context of what's really happening. It's hard to answer in a general way, but I would certainly say look at titles with skepticism.
Gotcha.
And think about how you could go deeper.
To follow up on that, you also said you should send different pieces of content to different people. So if you're sending an email campaign and you're A/B testing it, do you have tools that you like to use to host those different articles so that you can quickly create a diverging funnel?
I don't. And I think that how that's going to work out depends on what tools you have, et cetera. Remember that at first, because you don't know, you're going to go out to your general list. And you try one offer, see what happens. You go out to the same list a week later, you try a different offer, see where they fall, et cetera. There's going to be a lot of tweaking and adjusting to this model. I grossly oversimplified the process for the purposes of this presentation, but conceptually, what I want to bring you to is the idea of behavior-based segmentation rather than making assumptions on demographics or psychographics or title when you really don't know.
Got it.
Fair?
Yep.
Okay. So, good news. How are we doing on time? We doing okay on time? Are we doing okay on time? Okay, great.
We're about 25 minutes in.
Oh, okay, great. So this will be perfect. As a consequence of 5 years of doing this, I think somewhere between 60 to 70 of these workshops where I've helped people translate research into messaging, I can tell you that there are some things I see in common. And I can share these with you because I'm not violating any proprietarial confidentiality. These are just general insights I see all the time in almost every study we do. And I think some of these may be interesting to you. First thing I see all the time, can I trust you? And they're looking for signifiers, your brand, who else you do business with, what's your reach? Is it regional, national, global? How long you been in business? Now, if you're a big name like Cisco or IBM, this is easy. What if you're a challenger? What if you're a challenger? You gotta be prepared for this then. If you're a challenger and you realize that this is a common concern, you gotta think about what's a proxy for trust. Have you done a special project with the federal government? Is there a particular brand name client you are allowed to share your experience with? You can say, yes, we've done this for so-and-so. But this is gonna be a big one, especially the larger the cost, the bigger this issue becomes. This one, will I get good service after the sale? It's like the old pop song, will you still love me tomorrow? You've wined them, you dined them, you took them to dinner, you gave them the demo. It's the morning after, and you've already signed the contract, you've sold the product, but they're wondering, after the deal's done, are you just gonna disappear? Am I gonna be able to get good service afterwards? Or is this all upfront and then bye-bye, see you later once we get the money? People wanna feel assured that the post-consummation will be satisfying as well. This was one of the most surprising common insights that I've seen. And people often say that the salespeople that they talk to aren't sufficiently knowledgeable, especially technically knowledgeable. And people say they feel a certain sense of disgust when they say, well, they present scenarios to the salesperson, say, well, we have this, we have that, what would you do with this? And the salesperson just routinely says, I'll get back to you and I'll get back to you on that, get back to you on that. That lowers confidence. And people are looking for the person that you send physically to talk. Once you're able to do that or on a phone, make sure they're not just a junior intern. Make sure that they're a seasoned professional who can answer the deep and complicated questions, especially as the process of conversation moves forward. You knew this one was coming, the integration question. No one's going into a virgin landscape. This is territory that's already occupied. So people want to know, will this work with whatever it is they have already, what they've invested in? Be careful what you answer. Don't just say, yes, it will. They want to know details. What do you mean? APIs, translation engine? How exactly does this, how do these connect? Do you work with them as partners before you design the product so the integration's kind of built in and easy? Or is this an afterthought bolt on to your service, the integration with whatever that is? They want to know that. They want to know just how successfully this will work because they've been burned in the past with promises that weren't fulfilled. Another big one that you can expect to see is, can ordinary, sometimes they say business users, sometimes they say frontline staff, but can the ordinary people use this without deep training? And the second part is important too, without having to drag IT in every time there's a little blip or bubble, or a little change in the workflow must be made. Can ordinary people do that? Or do I have to spend a whole lot more money in development to get this done, which they really hate? Everyone does this. Some people says, art of sales, the art of business is giving people what they want. No, that's not true. What people want is the moon and the stars without having to pay a dime for it. That's what people want. We can't give them that because we go out of business. We'd be broke and we'd be out in the streets, right? Everyone's sensitive about price. I would just say ignore it, because everyone is, and you know what to do about this. You know about value sales. Just put this up here because I want you to expect it. It's coming. You know it's coming. And finally, the last one on this list of shared insights, and this one is important, and I think you do need to be prepared for, is this question: how do I demonstrate value to the people above me? So-and-so, the tech person may be sold on it. Maybe there's an operations person sold on your solution, etc. But they're concerned about, what about the CFO? Will I get his or her signature on this deal? You may need to make content that your internal champions can use to push this up and get approval from up above, because that's a very common shared insight.
So just going back,
Please
back, it looks like you have 7 things there that you could basically turn into a marketing campaign. Do you share these things before they're asked for? Is this the perfect email campaign to send? Or do you put them somewhere to be discovered when people want to know them later on?
I'm a little confused by the question. Like these are the insights that we would see in the research, for instance, that we would craft message. We talk about capabilities. Now, in this process where we distill to your top 5, it takes 8 hours, because we're going to get any one of these insights, maybe 3 or 4 capabilities underneath. And then we're evaluating for competitive distinction. Then we're evaluating for value. And then we want to boil down, what are our 5 strongest?
Gotcha.
So these are randomized. These are 7 common things I've seen. But for you out there, would I build a campaign on this? Not yet, because I don't know which, if any of these, are truly important for your audience.
Got it.
Or that you're strong in, because you want both. You want relevance and internal strength, right? Did that answer it?
Yeah, I kind of got from this, I was thinking that people would want the answer to all of these questions at some point in the process. But you're saying these are common, but depending on how they buy, they only may want the answer of how do I demonstrate value.
Which ones are most important to them? That's the way to think about, Ross, is you think about what's most important. The reason I say don't go by this as your list, I mean, these are common things. Most of you, I don't think anyone is shocked by what they see on the screen. My point is, if you have a limited investment in marketing, and we all do, what do you lead with? What are your lead messages? Eventually, in any sales process, you're going to address all these, right? Especially price. And there's no way you're going to have a sales conversation without price. But in terms of your introductory marketing approach, in which your sole job is to get them drawn into you so you can continue the sales process, pricing probably is not the way to start, unless you got something miraculous.
Unless you're Costco.
Yeah. Is that fair?
Fair. Yep.
All right, man. Now, I want to share briefly what I call the most common contradictions. What I mean by contradiction is, you do one research, you got 10 participants, and the same one research surfaces contradictory desires in the same thing for your product. And these are the most common. Some people say, we need to have this on-prem. No, we want this software as a service. And this is really the same way of saying the same thing. Something we have to own and control. Like financial services people are really sensitive. A lot of them say, well, because of compliance and regulatory, we have to have it on-prem. We can't go to SaaS. Others say, no, we have an initiative from the top down, head of IT on. We're going to the cloud altogether. No more product. It's all going to be service. Now, this gets to be fun. You'll see people saying, when I go for best of breed. And then this next guy says, when I shop for something like this, I want all in one. I want one throat to choke. I'm going to go with our usual vendor. If you're the challenger, you're going to talk about best of breed. If you're the established IBM, Amazon AWS, you're going to talk about the all-in-one. Just be prepared that the same company, there may be people who want elements of both. It's insane. It's not necessarily rational, but people aren't rational. Just be prepared for it. And the same, this one, OpEx versus CapEx, is again the same contradiction as on-prem versus SaaS, or product versus service. People have different models of paying for it. Some, like, they prefer the capital expense, one time only, make the big investment. The others are saying, no, we want a regular, predictable fee. Operational expense, the only way to go. It depends on the culture. And this is the one I think is the most interesting here that I see a lot. Same conversation. Sometimes the same person says, you know what's most important? It's got to be simple. Our frontline users have to be able to learn it like that without much training. And then they also say, but our company is special. So, you know, we want it to work out of the box simply, but we want to also make adjustments to our own practices and workflows, which of course necessarily makes the product more complex. I circled this because there's no easy answer to this. I'm just saying to you guys and gals, everyone, be prepared for this conversation. It's coming. Ross, you have another question for me? It seems like you do. No?
Not at the moment. I have a bunch at the end, but this makes a lot of sense, and I've had this conversation a lot, so I'm laughing to myself.
So I recognize, let's do a time. I'm going to start wrapping this up. So this is my last formal slide before we go into the Q&A. Most common mistakes I see. Defensive narcissism. I hate it when the CEO shows up in one of my workshops, because the CEO will be the champion and defender for the Kool-Aid, for the standard line. And you know what they say, you know, don't believe your own press releases. And it's true. You may be a founder of your company. You may be one of the co-founders. You may love the company. You may love the product. You may think it's the greatest thing in the world. But you got to let go of your own internal commitment to your company and product or service in order to be open to hearing what real people have to say. You got to let go of the defensiveness. And I'm telling you, this is hard. Really, really hard. The value, though, if you can overcome this, is that by being open and listening carefully and not getting defenses, you get insights your competitors may not have that can give you the advantage. My favorite, inevitably this comes up. Someone says, you know, we need to educate the buyer about X. So someone says, you know, I'm going to use security again because it's a common one. We're one of the strongest, most secure offerings in this space. We have the most secure, we do double encryption, we do this, that, and the other. And I say to them, you know, it's funny, I looked at the report and no one brought up security. No one said that that was important to them. And you know what they say next to me? They say, well, it should be important to them. We have to educate them why security should be important to them. And I go, wait a minute. I hope all of you hear the fundamental contradiction here. The whole point of these top 5 messages is that they're harmonious with, they're aligned with what people already prepared to believe, what they already value, what they already want to aspire to. If you need to educate them, by definition, that means it's not on the top of their minds, it's not close to their hearts. That means it's a crappy way of introducing yourself to a potential customer. Leave the education, if necessary, for later, or you figure out a super clever way to unite the thing you think you need to educate them on with something that these buyers have expressly said is important to them. Approach education with caution, or you'll be dumping money down a black hole. I alluded to this at the very beginning of our program. You know, a big mistake is just thinking of these as about marketing spin. Oh yeah, we got this capability and spinning it for the benefit. No, we're beyond that level. We're talking about people who are going to pick the top 3 vendors they're going to consider and then do the deep dive to make a recommendation to a superior about who they should go with. They're going to go into features, functions, what makes you different, why, comparing different people in your space. They all offer the same benefits, always the same. What makes you different? Where do you stand out? And that's going to be in the features and functions. Again, this is something I already touched on, which is that your message set is not supposed to tell the whole story of your company. You don't need to know everything about Kranz Communications. If I'm talking to you, I'm interested in finding out what your hot buttons are, and I want to speak to them. That's what I mean by nudges. I understand that what you're really frustrated with is that you've worked with writers in the past and they're crappy listeners who didn't ask enough questions and they produce generic content. So my nudge is to tell you all about Contradictions. Say, we begin. I'm going to do a deep dive by asking you a great deal of questions, and this is going to be the foundation for the work we do together, is a profound understanding of where you are and what you need. That's a kind of nudge message. I listen, nudge message. It's not the complete story. And then finally, the single biggest mistake people make is doing nothing. Just marketing without any real understanding of what their buyers want and how they shop and how you map to that. Same old stuff, apathy and neglect are the most common mistakes. It's doing nothing. I put on a screen a couple of resources for you. If you're interested in the research part of it, buyerpersona.com is, I think, and of course I'm biased. I'm going to admit I'm biased. I work for them. I work with them. But the content is good and you can see for yourself. And if you go to my website underneath, I have free ebooks on things like case studies and white papers and content strategy, etc. And when I say free, I really mean it. They're not gated. I'm not going to send you email afterwards. You're not going to be put on a list. It really is free. It's yours to use or not as you wish. And again, as I said earlier, if there are questions you're not able to ask for whatever reason now, please feel free to contact me. My phone number is there. My email address is up there. And if you'd like to connect with me, I'd say, please don't do it on Facebook. Please use LinkedIn. And I'd be happy to take any questions, if there are any questions. Ross, are there questions?
Jonathan,
There are many.
I got a question.
Ryan has
Okay.
a question.
Yes, I do. I love this concept about nudge versus educate. The way that I try to paraphrase it, and then I got a challenge is that you're trying to release pent-up demand versus creating demand, right? So essentially when you're educating an audience and you're creating demand. But I think that when you're moving a large audience, or you're trying to move a large audience from one sort of behavior with a problem to a new behavior, and your problem solving solution set is maybe 10x better, they may not know that education. So my question is like kind of like an attack on that statement, which is like, I believe that's where content education and strategy guides and recipe guides and ebooks come into play, is around educating your customer, while the nudges or the taglines are around releasing pent-up demand.
Let me address that.
Yeah.
So I think that Brian, I respect everything you just said, but I want to challenge you on a few things.
Okay.
I write a little bit about my background. I write tons of content. Ebooks, white papers, articles, blog posts, you name it. That's my bread and butter and how I make a living. And what I know from bitter experience is people don't want to be educated. You got to remember, for thinking customer centric, all they give a damn about is whatever issues are on them. And that could be pressure from above for performance, etc. We're talking today about lead messages in which you introduce and pull people toward you. So Brian, the answer to what you're saying is you're going to have you're going to have multiple tiers of content. Just as you have multiple tiers in your direct response campaigns, in your content, you're going to have your lead content to draw people to you. That lead content always has to speak to things people already know they have a problem about. For example, what you just said, I would say, instead of educating, I would say, are you, something along the line, are you sick of only getting 1/10 of the value? How do you amplify impact by 10 times? That's what they want. They want the amplified impact. You start there, and then you sneak in the education, and this is how you get it.
Got it.
You understand what I did there? I connected one to the other, and that's what you have to do. Otherwise, if you just lead about this magic sauce you have without context, that's not connected to something they already know they want, I know what they're going to do. They're going to ignore it.
But I love my magic sauce, Jonathan. I love it.
You know what I'm saying? Do you hear what I'm saying now?
I do.
Why
doesn't everybody like my baby?
Exactly. This is painful. Why doesn't everyone love my baby, right? But that's business. It's not about me. It's about the customer. They're in charge. We're not. Be super careful with education.
Thank you. That's cool. That's a good response.
Thank you.
So a lot of what you said brought up a lot of questions on execution, but I know this is about finding those answers before you execute what? You had a response before I even asked the question. What do you want to say?
That?
Oh, I thought you were going to like respond with something
No,
before
go
I even
for it.
finished my
What's the
question.
question? Yeah, go ahead.
So because there's a lot on execution, like one question I just always have is, you say you want to build trust, but if you're just starting, do you have any suggestions on how you build trust with things other than case studies if you may not have the NASA in your back pocket or the most impressive person to build a case study around?
Yeah. Okay. Good question. A lot of times, even if you have the case studies, you can't even do them because your client won't allow you to use them or name them. And then you have that miserable thing, the blind case study, which is compromised by 75% because the real value, of course, is in the name. So what do? You want to communicate trust. A couple things. Okay. One is you could talk about case studies. You can have testimonials. What if you don't have the case studies and testimonials? Number two is part of that trust is you're speaking the things that are valuable to me. You demonstrate empathy with what I'm going through. You show a recognition of my Gemba reality on the floor, on the ground. You show empathy and understanding with my real world, I think is the most profound way to communicate, to build trust, and maybe even more important than the case studies and testimonials. Those things I see as proof points, like the logos I threw up at the beginning of this, I did on purpose because I don't want people thinking, who is this guy, Jonathan Kranz? I never heard of him. And then I throw these things that people recognize. I go, oh, okay, so he's worked with companies I know of. I at least know this world. So he's not he's not from Mars, etc. But the real big thing, if anyone here is thinking, is liking this, they're going to like it because they're going to nodding their heads going, God, this guy is talking about the things I've experienced myself. He's right. I've experienced this. He's right. That's what trust is about, right?
Gotcha. Yeah, that's a good answer. So to lead into that, when you said people are on a budget and they can't do the full persona interviews themselves, they can go to a conference, they can do A/B testing. What's your opinion on surveys?
Surveys, there's a couple problems with surveys. I think they can be useful. What I think the problem with surveys is that they're a chicken and egg problem, because in a sense, you already have to know what you're looking for before you craft the questions, right? And that's what makes them so challenging, because you're not even sure if they're the right questions. That's one problem with surveys. Another problem with surveys is that most people send out surveys that are way too long, and you guys haven't done enough homework. I personally feel they should be 10 questions or fewer, and you should do your homework in advance and think about what do you really need to know. Thirdly, I would also say, can you put at like question 11, may we contact you for follow-up regarding the survey? That actually may be the most useful part of the survey, is that if you find someone who's left, suppose that they've written, where they get, what do you call it, when the free box for content? I forget what that's called, but where they can, it's not just a checkbox, they can actually free write. If you got someone who's making interesting observations, can you call that person and follow up and have a deeper conversation? Hey, I really like what you had to say about X. Can we talk about that for a few minutes? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a good response. It's a starting point if you're asking for a conversation, but you need that conversation of follow-up questions with your one very generic question about what you did in X situation to find out what even questions people have top of mind. We had a previous speaker who said that her best campaign was a 30-question survey to her entire addressable market, where she said she'd share the industry data afterward. But you're saying that in order to craft that 30-question survey, you'd first want to do these interviews to figure out what those 30 questions should even be.
I know that isn't practical. So what I'm saying is just be really careful about your questions. Don't leave this to the intern. You know what I mean? Make sure an experienced person is part of the process of crafting the questions. That's my real point. Somebody who already has worked with people, someone who knows the industry, someone who knows how to separate the wheat from the chaff. That's my point, because obviously it's not practical. You're going to do the interviews first, but what I'm just saying is make sure you ask informed questions.
Gotcha.
You know
okay.
what I mean?
I do know what you mean. So leading into the next question, which we talked about yesterday, but I'm going to put a certain spin on it based
Yes,
on what
sir.
you said today. You said to go to conferences and ask people what their experiences are. What's the most unexpected response you've gotten when you've done one of these interviews about what you thought someone was going to say about a product or how they bought something and how they actually experienced that product?
Damn, that is an excellent one. I'm trying to think myself. I can't personally think of one for myself where I did an interview, but I'm thinking about some research where the people on the call when the research presented were shocked. Um, I have had instances where people are utterly surprised, and often about very nitty-gritty specific things that they thought were afterthoughts that turned out to be forward thoughts. For example, I'll give you a good one. Here's a good one that comes up. Reporting. Often that's the afterthought of a tech solution is the report that's generated out. And often people are surprised to find, no, people want sophisticated reporting because they want to be able to tailor it to specifically to the people they know are going to read it. They want to make sure that the report is crafted in a way that's easily digestible by a C-suite executive as ultimate authority. So one of the things that's often surprising to people is they go, you know, we haven't really invested that much in improving the reporting. We just kind of took it as dump it into a spreadsheet and you get some numbers. And what they're finding out is, no, actually, it's pretty important that it generate data they can use internally to help them get support from executives and managers, et cetera. So that's an example I can think of.
That's super interesting. So the original belief is we're making an marketing automation software that's going to make you money, but really what you care about is looking good, not the fact that your company makes more money.
Well, I would say they're both important. And the thing is, like, imagine this. Here's the way I think about Ross. Imagine you look at competing offers to solve the same problem. If you know that reporting is going to be important to get sustained budget from up above, and you know that all things being equal, both of these programs are pretty good. Both these platforms work. Both of them are well known, you trust. But one of them has a reporting feature that allows you to devise output, customize it the way you want, and you know that'll help you be successful with the people above. Which purchase would you make? Which one would you choose? Right?
Number two.
Exactly. That's the point. That's the point.
Because both are going to help my company, but one helps me directly.
Exactly. Exactly.
That makes sense.
Exactly.
Okay, final question. You knew this was coming, so hopefully you have an amazing ninja response. Yes. Who do you like to learn from, and who would you want to interview on something like Masters of Marketing, or just ask questions for an hour if you could interview anyone?
Well, first of all, I do recommend Adele Ravella. I mean, if you find that there's interest in this persona, she's the expert. She's the leading expert. She just is. So I would recommend her. As far as for myself, you know, I don't know if there's a marketing pro that I consistently follow. That doesn't mean I disrespect people. I love Drew Davis. Andrew Davis, for example, he's not only entertaining, but he's actually deeply intelligent, and he also conducts his own research, which sets him apart. But, you know, I often like to talk to people or learn from outside marketing. You know, people ask me, Jonathan, what book made you a copywriter? And they say they expect me to talk about Ogilvy. They expect me to talk about, you know, the big names in direct marketing. And I'll say, you know, the book that made me a copywriter was, I can't even remember the exact title, The Art of Rhetoric by William Booth, an academic in the 70s and 80s. But what he taught me is that everything that you write, everything you say actually has three dimensions. It communicates not just the substance, like the words thank you. We know what thank you means, that's the substance, but there's also, my putting those words there says something about me, the speaker, and it also implies something about what I expect about you, the listener. And my understanding and broadening of my understanding communications beyond the substance of what is said to understanding that everything communicates in two other ways. They say something about me, the speaker, and about you, the listener, transform the way I write copy. And it made me the copywriter that I am. So my point I want to leave to you marketers is, if you're serious, you're all serious. I know you're serious about learning, but expand, look beyond traditional marketing gurus, because too many of them are speaking the same language in the same bubble. And you may want to look outside in academic areas and saying, who's doing interesting stuff in psychology or political science or sociology or rhetoric or those things? Can you learn anything? Are there ideas that might be useful? And you know that you're fishing in waters where others are not. So the insights you get might be a little bit more fresh than the recycled stuff you get at every single conference over and over again.
Interesting. That's a great answer. I also just witnessed that yesterday. I'm learning Russian, and just learning a second language, they talk about, this is exactly what the word means, but in this context, this is how it can be used, and it means you're polite, you're not polite. And it's very interesting that you bring that up, because I've started thinking about, English words and what they mean, but I never really thought about it because I never had an impetus until I started learning something completely unrelated.
It's like, I'll give you a concrete example of this. How many times have you gone to a website for a potential vendor and their selling proposition is, we're simple, but the site is incredibly complicated to use? What message does that send to the visitor?
Actions speak louder than
Ostensibly
words.
saying we're simple, but your website is complicated and confusing. You've just lost, right? That's what I'm talking about. That's what you were just saying as well. Then if you know that simplicity is important, then it's not just saying we're simple. You're going to make sure that everything on the website is easy to navigate, use simple words, use clear language, etc. All the things that you would do. But you embody it. You don't just say it. You embody the virtue. You embody the virtue. Right?
For sure. We're at time right now. It is 2:30, or whatever time zone you're in. It is that 30. So we've got to jump off. Jonathan, this has been an amazing presentation all about content marketing. I like the unique spin on it. It's not so much exactly make this content, but it's how to decide what content to make, the step before you actually dive in to start producing content. And I'm fascinated. I don't think that I've actually thought about it this clearly before, because it's always just been a matter of, I need content right now. I'm going to make this because I'm an expert in it. So thank you for this thought experiment and process to go through.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Much appreciated. Thank you, everyone, for attending. It was a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Same. See you tomorrow on the next Masters of Marketing. See you, Jonathan. Talk to you soon.